And we are live. It's got 9 seconds. I hope we weren't live for too long. Welcome, folks, to the Protestant Line #2. I do want to encourage you, if you have any questions this evening, to just type them in. I'm going to try to make sure I'm paying attention on my phone. We are going to be talking about Revelation, the book of Revelation to some degree, and you might have a question about current events that coincides with that, and we'd be glad to talk with you about that. Of course, we have Zach with us, and tonight our guest is Pastor Matt Powell of Christ Reformed Church in Casper, Wyoming.
Hello.
I have tried to get you over here at least once.
Yeah.
And we'll do that again for sure. So don't keep us in your thoughts, because we'd love to have you come over and speak with us. But tell us, or tell the folks, whatever short synopsis you feel like they need to know about you before we dig in, and
okay.
We'll let Zach follow up with any questions too.
I've been a pastor for. I'm going to look over at my ordination certificate to remind myself here. I've been a pastor for almost 17 years now. I was out in Colorado for about 10 years, out on the eastern plains of Colorado, out in Lyman, pastored a little church out there, and then came up here to Casper to plant a church about 7 years ago. I'm a member of the Reformed Church in the United States. Been born and raised. I was baptized into the RCUS. My father was an RCUS pastor, and out in California and then in Colorado. So I've been a pastor for a while. I'm married, got 4 kids. Love being here in Casper. I've written a couple of books. That's kind of. What else would you like to know?
So how long did you say you've been in Casper?
About, let's see, just a little over 7 years now.
Okay. Zach, you had a question.
Yeah. So Matt, I think I have that you've written 4 books. Is there any?
Yeah.
Okay. And those are titled Meditations on Reformed Worship. And these might be a little condensed, so if they need correction, let me know.
No problem.
The Essentials of Christian Religion.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord is There, Studies in the Book of Ezekiel.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, Pulling Back the Curtain, Studies in the Book of Revelation.
Yeah, that's the 4. Yeah.
So what particular order did you write those in, and what have you learned kind of about yourself and through your studies, through specifically venturing out and writing books pertaining to the study of the Bible?
Well, Essentials of the Christian Religion was first, and that was just a little book that I wanted. I wrote mostly for my own use. I wanted something that I could just easily hand somebody to sum up the Christian faith, the historic Christian faith, from a Reformed perspective, although not necessarily getting into the weeds of a lot of different doctrinal disagreements about different things, but just, the basics, the general, ideas of sin, condemnation, justification, sanctification, the role of the church, things like that, the sorts of things I go through a new membership class with someone who wants to join our church. Next was the book on Ezekiel, the Lord is There. That came out of a Bible study. Actually, both that book and the book on Revelation came out of Bible studies that I taught. And so having taught a subject on Bible study, when I was down in Colorado in particular, I had a real spread out congregation, and I would end up traveling around quite a bit and doing Bible study several times on the same subject. And so then by the time I taught a Bible study 3, maybe 4 times on the same book, felt like I had a pretty good understanding. And so then I had the notes fairly refined, and so it was relatively easy just to kind of put all that into a book. I don't know what life on your terms is that somehow got on my page. That is not me. But the essentials, that's the one right there. That's the first one.
Yeah.
And then the Ezekiel one, let's see, that's probably down a little bit. Yeah, that's the Kindle version. If you the paperback version has a different cover. I kind of like that cover of the paperback version because it was drawn by a young girl in my congregation there, who it was her mom that actually asked me to do the book, and so and she was a budding young artist, and she drew. There it is. Yeah, she drew a picture for me of the vision of the final of the temple of the city, you know, at the end of the book, and I thought she just did a really neat job with that. It was kind of a fun cover that I left on there that I just really enjoy. Thought she did a good job of capturing that, and yeah, you know, the Lord is there. That's kind of how the book ends. The name of the city is the Lord is there. The presence of God. That's what that's all about. Then I wrote Meditations on Reformed Worship. That came out of a series of articles I wrote when I planted the church here in Casper. Most of the people that have been involved in this work didn't really have a lot of a Reformed background. And so I wrote a series of articles. Yeah, that's it right there. You just passed a little bit there. Oh, no problem. And so I put those articles together, just a series of articles on the, this is motivations, principles, and practices. So the first, so it's kind of like why we worship. That's where I start, is the what motivates us to worship, why worship is important. The second part of the book is general principles of worship. You know, we look at things like the regulative principle, the dialogical principle of worship, you know, a lot of things like that. What it is on a principled level that kind of governs the way we worship. And then finally, I go through like all the different elements of worship. I look at, you know, why do we have a Gloria Patri? Why do we raise our hands? Why do we sing hymns? Why do we do confessions? What are the sacraments? What's their role? And all those kinds of things. So just kind of go through those one at a time and look at what role those things are, where, you know, where those things are talked about in the Bible, how the Bible talks about those things. And so that's, and then finally the Revelation book. You know, you could do a commentary on the book of Romans or Galatians or something like that, of course, you know, but, you know, everybody's done those. There's an awful lot of, and I never think of this, you know, this or the book on Ezekiel as commentaries per se. They're not, you know, I don't do deep dives into the Greek or anything like that. They're just, they're aimed at the layperson more, to give, you know, the serious, but, you know, the serious student of the Bible, but, you know, not a seminary student, an opportunity to get a good big overview of what that book's about and how to think about it, how to read it, and so forth.
Yeah, I don't think
So
you really
would you
want to
say,
I don't think you want to compete with GK Beale anyway, right? You need to go a different route if you're gonna.
Well, as someone, I remember somebody asking me, you know, so are you following Beale on this? You know, and I said kind of generally, and yet at the same time, maybe somebody doesn't have time to read all 1,500 pages of Beale, you know, so so that's kind of where I'm hoping to, you know, fill a slot for people.
so would you say then, Matt, that through the repetition of these, the Bible studies and going and studying, you know, like Ezekiel and Revelation so many times and presenting it to those various Bible studies you're having, was that just kind of what built up the confidence to go ahead and come up with these books and write those for the layperson, if you will?
Yeah, I suppose. You know, building up confidence is typically not one of my problems. It's probably more the other way around. I'm probably a little overconfident. You know, the way I generally approach life is, if I want to learn how to do something, then I just start doing it and fail and then learn through that. You know, it's like, well, let's learn to do it a little better next time. And so, some people would wait until they had their PhD and were 50 years old before they wrote their first book, and that's just not really my approach to things. I just kind of dive in, and if it's useful to. It's one of the reasons I really like blogging, was because you just kind of sort of take the approach of, I'm going to throw it out there, and if people find it useful, then fantastic, and if they don't, well, it's no skin off my nose. I learned some things, and you know what I mean, and approach it. Certainly, the repetition of Bible study, certainly feels like, when you've taught a subject 3-4 times, you start to feel like you've got a pretty good handle on it,
So tell me about that, because I know in the beginning of your, what are we're just calling it a book on Revelation, since we're not calling it a commentary.
Yeah, you'd call it a study guide, or call it a study guide, I guess. Yeah.
Your study guide on Revelation. You talk about how I guess you had taught through Revelation 4 times.
Yeah. 3 times out in Colorado, and then 1 time here in Casper.
So tell me how that came about, because that seems like an awful lot for your short life to have gone through it 4 times already.
Yeah, well, what happened was, in Colorado, my church, the Eastern Colorado, as you know, is very sparsely populated, right? Yeah. So we have groups that come to our church and that came to the church in Lyman that lived an hour's drive away in 2 different directions. So by the end of my stay there in Lyman, I had a Bible study in Lyman. I had a Bible study an hour north of Lyman, and I had a Bible study almost an hour south of Lyman, right? So I would teach a subject in one place, and then the other group would say, well, you're going to teach that here. And so then I'd go teach that there, and then I'd teach it again down. And those ended up getting spread out over time a little bit, which was good, because it meant I wasn't just teaching the exact same material every time. I was kind of refining it as I went, right? And that happened with both the book of Ezekiel and the book of Revelation. And I've always been drawn towards the things that maybe people don't look at. I think Ezekiel is one people just are kind of daunted by. That's just kind of a scary book in a lot of ways. It's dense and strange, and relies on knowledge of a lot of other things. And Revelation also, a lot of people read Revelation without a deep understanding of the Old Testament. And then that's when you start getting all the crazy, it's microchips, or it's, black helicopters and stuff like that, because they don't understand their Old Testament. They don't understand how to read it in the light of the Old Testament, in the light of Jewish apocalyptic literature and all that stuff. So they just read it through a modern lens and get it all wrong. So I'm just drawn to teaching things that people haven't thought about before, people haven't studied before, and that's what kind of led me into. I mean, we did a lot of other Bible studies out there too, but those were the 2 that hit people the most, because they were subjects that a lot of them had come out of dispensationalism, and so they'd rejected dispensational theology, but they didn't know what to think as a result. And Revelation was just this weird book that they just kind of didn't deal with.
Yeah, Zach, any other follow-up question there?
Not much. I was just I didn't have a question derived, but I was just kind of following the thought of, I would think if you're going to write a book on Revelation, you'd need a deep understanding of the covenants brought forth in the Old Testament. So I guess,
for sure,
how much studying did you have to do? I mean, that's a lot of work, is to understand all of those prior to even beginning to understand Revelation, much less draw up a study guide after that. That just
right.
To me seems daunting, and I have a huge amount of respect for you for tackling a task like that. Well,
I guess I appreciate that, but I guess the amount of respect would depend on how good you think the book is. But I mean, I had a lot of help. I had, there's a lot of men that had gone before me and done a lot of work. You mentioned G.K. Beale, and his work was outstanding, and Hendrickson and Warfield and a lot of others. The general views of eschatology that I had come to through, the early reformers didn't really talk about eschatology a great deal. But still, there's still the whole way of structuring your understanding of the Bible, from Calvin, from Turretin, from Hodge, and so we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and probably the number one credit in a lot of ways really does, in my mind, as far as Revelation specifically, would have to go to G.K. Beale. His commentary on Beale is. And almost, if you're willing to tackle, I'm maybe talking myself down, but if you're willing to tackle that 1,500 pages, there's really not a lot of point reading my book. I wouldn't call it condensed Beale, because it's more than that. I don't follow Beale on everything, but his commentary is outstanding. It's just really, really good.
I've pulled up Tim Challies. I mentioned him on our previous program.
Yeah.
I didn't pull him up. So I think Tim Challies has got a great resource. Just type in Challies, and I don't see it anywhere on here, but it's at the top there. CHA. And but if you don't know about it, Google Challies and best commentaries, and you'll get this list. This is on Revelation. I don't know if this is in order, but top of his list is G.K. Beale.
Yeah, that's the one.
And I will. And I actually have the condensed version of that. I don't have this one either, and I want to get it. I'm gonna see if there's another one that I've got that he's got it here. But I'll go down. Grant Osborne, Baker exegetical commentary. I don't know if you're familiar with any of these. Stephen Smalley, I think I have that one, which I think Beale mentioned Smalley in his. So
Mounts and yeah.
So if anybody's interested, there's your top 5, I guess, according to Challies. I'm not saying I'm in agreement, because I don't know that I would be in agreement. I haven't read them all, but they're good. It's a good place to start anyway. But I think this is a good opportunity, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can give some credit maybe to your dad as well. I come out of a dispensational background. I didn't know it was dispensational, but when you grow up being told about black helicopters and microchips, you have to unlearn things, whereas you had the benefit, I'm assuming, of not having to unlearn some things from the Old Testament, which probably is of a great benefit at a younger age.
Yeah, for sure. My dad was obviously a huge influence. Although, interestingly, you said I didn't have to unlearn anything, and that's actually not entirely true.
Well, there you go.
My dad was a postmillennialist earlier on. He came into the Reformed faith in the 60s, especially through Rushdoony. He knew Gary North and was strongly influenced by kind of that whole world. By the time I was a teenager, he'd moved away from Rushdoony and theonomy. And he would describe himself as an optimistic amillennialist or a pessimistic postmillennialist, depending on the day. So he kind of, having walked away from a more kind of hardcore theonomic postmillennial perspective, he kind of just wasn't all that plugged into that whole debate anymore. And so, but certainly in terms of just the whole general way I understand theology and the covenants and God's sovereignty and all, and the gospel itself, of course. Heavily indebted to my father, and one way or another, we all, like I said, stand on the shoulder of giants. And man, I sure miss my dad. Yeah.
Real quick before we move forward, just Scott Nadeau, I'm assuming he shouts out, says hello to you.
Oh yeah,
from the online world. So
hello.
Wanted to share that with you, Scott. If you have a question, ask the question. That'll be better too. So before we get into talking more about the Book of Revelation and about your thoughts, your meditations and studies on Revelation, you are living in a state that is somewhat similar to ours, where the restrictions haven't been quite as stringent as some other states. How have you been what have you been telling your people? I guess is kind of the way we framed it. What have you been sharing with them just in general about what's going on in the world and how we should react? Maybe thoughts you would have for others on how we should be reacting to a situation like we are in today.
Yeah. You know, actually the first, I did a couple of live streamed Bible studies the first time after we had this, I think we just canceled one week, and then the next week, now that we were realizing this was going to be a little bit more long-term thing, we started doing live streaming Bible studies, and I shared some thoughts about trusting God, of course, knowing that all things are in his hands. He's sovereign. All things happen for good for his people. But that should never lead us to be complacent, because such things are also a warning. There wouldn't be things like pandemics if there wasn't sin in the world, right? And so while we would never take this is, I'm always leery of, a hurricane hits Louisiana as well as a judgment against Louisiana. Well, I think you're reading an awful lot into the providence of God that you don't know, right? In this particular case, this is the whole world pretty much. And we certainly know that the world is under the curse of God. And that's one really useful thing about understanding the book of Revelation, is how you can actually understand a single event as having multiple purposes. It sanctifies God's people. It warns the wicked. For some of the wicked, it's actually their final judgment, because they die, and that's the end of their opportunity. So my message was, don't give in to fear and panic. Take it as a warning to examine yourself if you be of the faith, right? Are you, recognize this is a wake-up call about the transience of life, the very fragile nature of all the things we put our trust in, if we're putting our trust in anything but God. And how everything, a whole lot of people, everything they've worked for and everything they saved up and planned on, and it's all gone in a moment. It's all gone just like that, and that's a tragedy from one perspective. But from another perspective, take it as a warning. Take it, vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, and things like this should remind us of that, so that we flee to that which is permanent, and we don't lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven, on earth, because those treasures can be taken away at any time. Right? And will be taken away from all of us, because we're all going to die. Rather, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. So God's people ought to be looking at this as an opportunity to reflect, an opportunity to renew our trust and our hope in God, and especially to look for opportunities to show the world what it means to live lives of hope, live lives that are not focused on this life and all that we can get right now, and how much money or pleasure or fun we can have or whatever, but how we can show others what it means to live a life that's focused on the eternal promises of God. That's what it means to live a life of hope. That's a powerful apologetic, to show people the love of Christ rather than just living in fear and panic right now. To be wise, to be prudent, but not to live in fear. We shouldn't jump off the temple and demand that God catch us. So we should be prudent, take care of ourselves and others, but at the same time, not just give in to fear and panic. So that's kind of the big message I've been trying to communicate to people about the present circumstances.
Would you say then you've seen a lot of people kind of maintain an eternal perspective throughout, or is it I don't know, I kind of see a trend, as we've seen through our videos and other things, of people are turning to God, but then when things seem to get a little better or restrictions get loosened, you see them fall away. And I just don't think they're heeding warnings and really having an eternal perspective, and I'm just not sure what you think of that, Matt or Todd.
Well, not to cut off Todd, I'd love to hear his thoughts on it too. But I think things like this reveal what's in people. I think some people are going to be some people are going to be refocused, and they're going to get recommitted, and they're going to maybe they got distracted with the things of the world to a certain degree, but now they're refocused on what really matters. Other people are going to, as soon as the restrictions are limited, they're going to go right back to their earthly lifestyles just like they were before. I people who talk a good game about trusting God, but when things get hard, they reveal in the way that they react that they don't really, and none of us trust God as we should, of course. But I just think it reveals things like this have a way of stripping away the pretenses, right, and showing what's really in people. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how it feels to me. My hope is, my great prayer is that something like this is an opportunity, and that a lot of people turn to the Lord, turn to permanence, and turn to, away from the empty things of this world, and turn instead to the eternal, that which will last forever.
No, I agree with you 100%. And I think what I have noticed from a distance kind of is because I kind of follow a few different churches, their broadcasts. We weren't even live. I mean, we weren't putting video out. We were keeping some audio that people could go listen to of my sermons.
Mm-hmm.
But we started live streaming, and then that's on Facebook, and I was paying attention. And those first couple of weeks, and of course, one of them was Easter, when things got serious around here. There was a lot of views of sermons, and each week it's successively gone down.
Yeah.
So it's that initial, it's the parable of the soils, that you can watch, just some people they're grabbing a hold of it real quick and then it's snatched away, or, it's just, and it's like you're saying, God is sovereign. He's the one that's causing salvation and sanctification. And for us, it's kind of just watching, and it's revealing those that are truly being sanctified and those that aren't. And like, I do think that it's an opportunity for us to witness, as you said, to the hope that we have, and not be in fear. But my thing has always been, and I want to respect the government, but I also have thought it was a little bit over the top from the beginning.
Right.
But you want to have respect for, it is very contagious. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the videos here recently of those doctors out of California.
I've seen the headline posted. I haven't actually watched the video.
It's a really good video where they're just presenting the raw data. And what they're saying there is, what we did in response at the beginning was proper. We didn't know what it was. It was a new virus. But now what we're seeing is it's very contagious, highly contagious.
Right.
But the flu is deadlier than COVID-19, according to the raw data.
Right.
And so we need to now stop and don't destroy the economy.
Yeah.
Because we have this very highly contagious. And again, we need to respect that there are people that are at higher risk, and we don't want to get them exposed. But there's ways to go about that without shutting everything down. But with all of that said, I mean, that's what this fear was we shouldn't have that kind of a fear. We should have respect. It's really respect for God, because God is the one that brings destruction. God is the one that brings salvation. And he's in control. And so we need to respect what he allows to be unleashed upon this earth. And so that's what we've tried to do, and without having too much fear.
And he gives us the governments that we have too, right?
Correct. Right.
And, I remember, on the subject of, civil disobedience and so forth, and Calvin, of course, did some groundbreaking thinking on that in terms of the lesser magistrate doctrine and those kinds of things. But, he says that, if people are complaining about the government and I do plenty of complaining about the government, myself. His answer is people, if you have a bad government, then you have to accept that as a punishment from God for your wickedness. And that's a tough pill to swallow, but I think it's one that more of us need to consider is, maybe if you don't like the government, maybe we need to look at what we've been expecting from our government all these years. That's made the government what it is, because it didn't come out of nowhere. And so, I think that's maybe a neglected aspect of the issue of our government. That it's easy, it's the easiest thing in the world to complain about the government, but submitting to God to maybe what's a judgment, maybe is something we need to think about a little more.
No, I agree 100%. I was telling someone, especially in our country, we are the government. I mean, I realize that we have these representatives and we think of the government as separate from us, but we're the ones that elect the people that then go and do the things that we don't like. And we have the option not to elect them again
Right.
and again. And so I agree. And this country, in very many ways, it's been a long time coming for some of the things some of the policies we have in place, and the
fact is, if we didn't have so many people in this country that were so anxious to get wealth for nothing, to have somebody that was just going to bail them out of all their problems and solve it, any bad thing that comes along, well, we need to pass a law, the government can save us from it if we just, a great deal of the reason we have the problems that we have is for that very reason, is we put people who make these promises to us. Can you imagine any president ever getting elected by saying, mostly your problem is that you make bad decisions and don't work as hard as you should? Would any president ever get elected saying that? And yet that's the truth, is that for most people, they do far more damage to themselves by their bad decisions than anything the government ever does to them.
You're correct, Zach. You breathed like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think something that's been kind of irritating to me through this whole situation is how many people, and it's good to a point, don't get me wrong, but how many people are so willing to be submissive to the government, but yet when it comes to God, they're unwilling to be the same way. I think that's just been something that has been crazy to me through this whole experience, that we're willing to give up our rights set forward in the Constitution without any sort of mandate. We're just handing them over,
right?
But we're unwilling to do that for the creator of the universe. And Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I was going to say, I do think, and I'm right now really struggling with the question of exactly at what point and we're in our state, we're allowed to meet 10 or fewer people, that's what we're doing. We're having church, but I'm just having multiple services with 10 or fewer people. And so that eases my conscience somewhat. But, at what point is a government order not to meet as a church a violation of God's law? And then at what point do we have to say, I have to obey God rather than man? And like I said, the fact that we can at least meet some is helping me with that struggle. But even that, I wonder, it's a tough question for me.
Well, and the reason it's tough is because, as you just said, God gave us the government. Is this a judgment?
Yeah.
And that's, I've struggled immensely. What we've been doing is we're having a service on Sunday and we're broadcasting it, but I've told it's not a corporate worship service. We're not going to pretend it's a corporate worship service.
Right.
I can't issue a call to worship.
Yeah.
Because I can only ask 9 of you to show up. So it's an addition. It's a help to your family worship or your private worship.
Right.
And I know that in most people's minds, they're still treating it like corporate worship. And we've changed it some so that people know to some degree it's not the same thing. Yeah. But it's really like we've been denied corporate worship. And I think some of our folks, are feeling that, that they understand that. But in 2 weeks, we get to go back to having it. We can, I don't know if you know what's going on over here, but starting May 10th, we can meet again.
Oh,
We're
good.
just supposed to keep families 6 feet apart,
Yeah.
and we can't have the Lord's Supper, at least the way, because you're not supposed to pass anything one to another.
No.
So we have a box that we take the tithe in anyway, so we don't,
Yeah.
we don't pass the plate or anything, but we're going to probably do something a little bit more creative just to get the hands of the elements into people so that we're not passing them, I guess you would say. But
right. We're supposed to get updated orders from the governor this week, and so we don't know yet.
Yeah.
We don't know.
But to me, it's almost more unconstitutional what's happening right now than what was happening or what's about to happen than what's been happening. Because before it's like, okay, nobody can meet 10 or more people.
Right.
And so it's across the board. It's not quite persecution, right? Because it's everybody. But now it's like you guys can meet, but in worship, you're not allowed to pass anything. They're basically telling you that you can't have the Lord's Supper. And it's that's almost feels more like persecution, because if you go to a restaurant, you're going to pass food back and forth. You're going to pass bills back and forth. And so it's a little bit weirder. So we're definitely keeping our spiritual minds alert and aware to what's going on, so we're not caught up in something later.
And a point I've made, because people say, well, this isn't persecution because these are orders that are affecting everybody. But, the fact is that an awful lot of the persecution that Christians have suffered over the years have been things that weren't specifically aimed at Christians. Like when in the first century, the late first century, Diocletian wasn't it? That passed edicts that everybody had to worship at the image of Caesar, or think of Nebuchadnezzar's command that everybody bow to the idol. That wasn't aimed at anybody. Everybody had to do that, but it was the Christians or the Jews that had to say, no, we can't do that. And then came under the attack of the government, under Rome or Nebuchadnezzar or whoever. So that's persecution, and it can be persecution even if it's not aimed specifically at Christians. Yeah. And so in this particular case, if the government gives us an order that we cannot in good conscience follow, then whether that order was aimed at Christians specifically or not is not the point. The point is that we are suffering for our conscience, our obligation, our higher obligation to obey God.
I'm with you. Don't get me too fired up. I'm with you. Because some people have said how many mosques or how many synagogues have had to shut down worship. Are they quietly just continuing to do whatever they want to do, and nobody's paying any attention while all the attention?
I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, Sherry and David say hello to you.
Hello, Sherry and David.
Hopefully they're still on. But so how do we then, we'll move from that particular situation to the book of Revelation, for what many people would want to tune in to find out. How do we look at what's going on today in light of the book of Revelation, according to what you have studied from Revelation?
Yeah, well, of course, there are those that would believe the book of Revelation is all about just the first century, leading up to the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. There are those that believe, and probably the much greater in America, at least in the present time, that believe that Revelation is all talking about things that are going to happen in the future, probably after the rapture. I don't believe either one of those things, of course. I think the book of Revelation is talking about the present age, not the 21st century, but the whole present age between the first and second comings of Christ, the church age. And it's not laying out a series of chronological events, but it's rather in symbolic form, showing us the nature of the true spiritual warfare that's going on in this age, what it is that's going on, how we ought to think about our lives and our place, and the struggle that we have with the world that we live in. How it is that God's working out his plan of salvation through this particular period. And so I think, first of all, I think that there are, and this is a big complex discussion that I think we could, you'd probably need to read the book as a whole to really get my thoughts on as a whole, but just a few A few thoughts. We have in the book of Revelation, we have, of course, the well-known 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? The first one, which is the rider on a white horse with a bow, that I think is a false Messiah. That's the false Messiah, Antichrist. I think that's what it is. He's a rider on the white horse. Later on, we see the rider on the white horse is definitely Jesus, the one that appears in Revelation 19. He's got a sword, though. And that's a significant thing. A rider with a bow would have a very different connotation to a reader within the Roman Empire than a rider with a sword. A rider on a bow, that's a horse archer. That's like, and horse archers, the civilizations that used horse archers were the most hated people on earth at that. They were the Scythians, they were later on the Huns, then the Mongols. They were raiders, and because to learn to fight with a bow on horseback, you had to spend your whole life doing that. It was an extremely difficult thing to do well, right? So civilizations that engaged in horse archery, you could either, as a civilization, pursue the horse and bow, or you could pursue anything else like farming and blacksmithing and crafting and trades and all those other things. But you probably couldn't do both, because if you were going to be an effective fighter from horseback, you had to spend your whole life doing that, right? So the civilizations that practiced that were generally nomads, and they were herdsmen, and they also made a lot of their wealth by raiding their neighbors, right? And horse archer armies were just extremely difficult for anybody who didn't have that skill to counter. The Romans had a terrible time countering horse archers, the Scythians and the Parthians and so forth on their eastern border. So that rider on a white horse with a bow would have a very sinister, negative connotation to the ancient reader, right? So there's the rider on the white horse. Following him is war. And he's he goes forth conquering and to conquer. And in some ways he looks like the Messiah, except he's evil, right? That's what the rider on the white horse looks like. And he's the false Messiah. He's the Antichrist. He's going forward, trying to bring about in the world what only Christ can ultimately bring about, which is domination, rule over everything. Following him is war. Following war is famine. Following famine is death, right? And those things always, the 4 horsemen always ride together. Those things always go one at a time. Go together, following each other. So we've got a plague on us, right? Some kind of plague. It's maybe a really super bad plague. It's maybe kind of only a moderately bad plague, but that it's certainly causing tremendous economic turmoil and disruption, and I think we've only seen the beginning of it. I certainly don't hope so, but typically what the economic turmoil that we're experiencing right now typically leads to war. That's just historically what usually happens. So I would not be surprised at all if some pretty major wars come out of what's going on right now. I certainly hope that's not the case, but history points us in a different direction, I think. And that leads to famine, and that leads to death. But here's the thing. In Revelation 6, when we see those 4 horsemen, what are those coming out as a result of? They're coming out of the seals, the opening of the seals of the 7 seals of the scroll, right? The scroll is presented that comes from the throne of God. The one on the throne is holding the scroll. He's saying, is anyone worthy to open the scroll? Nobody's worthy to open the scroll. Everybody weeps because nobody is found that's worthy to open the scroll until the lamb that was slain, the Lion of Judah, steps forward and he says he's worthy, and he's worthy to open the scroll, right? This all is a picture of a last will and testament, probably in Rome. When a man died and he would leave his last will and testament, it would often be sealed in this fashion where you'd open a little bit of the scroll up until the first seal, and that would say some things for certain, this is what these people inherit, right? And there's one part of this will that would be revealed, and then you'd open the next seal, and then it would say, here's who gets the next part. And you'd open the next seal, and then so it'd be sealed in a linear fashion like that. So this is a struggle because these four horsemen, this sounds like a very bad thing, right? False Messiah, war, famine, death. Nobody likes any of those things. However, these are coming out as a very good thing, as a scroll that's coming from God, from the throne of God. These writers all write out from the throne of God. This is all God's will for his salvation of his people. And that's how we need to understand. Now later on, we get the 7 trumpets and then the 7 bowls. And those are, and you see when you read those, they sound a lot. You've got the 4 that all are talking about global things happening everywhere, and either they're happening on a limited fashion or an expanding fashion. And then the 5th and 6th one increase and expand the pattern and spiritualize the pattern. And then the 7th one ends it. It's always the thunder and lightning and great hail and a great noise. It's the culmination of the pattern, right? So each one of these 7s follows a similar pattern. And what that shows us, I think, as we go through and we see, is that each of these 7s are talking about this whole period of time and how to think about it, the events that go on in this present age from different perspectives. From one perspective, when you've got the 4 horsemen, and that causes a lot of suffering for God's people. However, it's clear that what this process does is it continually moves the gospel forward by disrupting, by destroying, by raising up and throwing down. And what do we see in history? We see these great messianic movements, these great historical movements, people who are going to conquer the world. They go out and they cause all this war and all this disruption. The old structures are, as a result, they're destroyed, they're thrown down. New empires and new nations and new structures arise, and each time the gospel goes forward. Each time the gospel spreads further as a result. Old structures, old status quos that prevented the gospel or corrupted the gospel or perverted the gospel in different ways get destroyed, and the gospel, a lot of death, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of chaos and destruction, but the result is always the same. The gospel goes forward. God brings judgment on some, he warns others, he advances the gospel, more people get saved, God's glorified. And that's the way I think we need to look at this. I don't know exactly how this is going to all work out. Obviously, I don't think anybody does. But what I do know is that God is doing what he always does, which is he's raising up and throwing down. Right now, it seems like it's more of the latter. Right now, it seems like he's throwing some things down, doesn't it? But I don't know. I don't know what's going to rise out of this. But what I know is that a lot of people are losing their faith in the old status quo. I know a lot of people are losing their faith in the ability of the government to tell them the truth and to protect them and to maintain things as they always have been. And that, in my mind, is a very good thing. Revelation, you've got the 4 horsemen. That talks about historical processes, historical events that cause these things, right? That move the plan of God forward to advance God's purposes. Then you've got the trumpets. A trumpet is a warning. A trumpet in those days usually wasn't a musical instrument. It was an instrument of militaries and city watches and things, right? So they would blow warnings when enemies were coming, or they would sound military signals for the army to advance or to retreat, things like that, right? Like a bugle. This is a warning, and you see it in the judgments that come as a result of the 7 trumpets. They're all limited judgments. It's 1/3 of the people that die. It's 1/3 of the water that's poisoned. It's 1/3 of the stars that fall, right? It's limited, and that fits with the idea of it being a judgment. And that's a warning, and in the 7 trumpets, it always says that's a warning for people to repent. Sadly, the inhabitants of this world, they don't repent. The book of Revelation is a very predestinarian book because there are those that have been given to the Lamb and there are those that have been given to the beast, and those two never ever cross, right? Nonetheless, the warning still has its purpose because it shows God's judgment to be just when the judgment comes. Then the bowls, that's a total judgment. Now it's all the people that die and all the water that's poisoned and all the sky that's darkened and so forth, right? The bowl is a pouring out of that judgment. So what that shows us is what is the pandemic? How should we view it? Well, on one hand, it's a historic event that's going to move the progress of the gospel forward. in whatever way God seeks to do that. But we know that because that's what always happens in history. The gospel always goes forward and expands and grows, right? It is also a warning on the people of this world that they need to repent. Those that are God's will do so. Those that aren't won't. And finally, for some people, it is the final judgment because people are going to die. And those people that die, this is, if they are unbelievers, for them, it is the final judgment. And they're going to go face their maker and be called to account for their, and all of the things, if it's, Hurricane Katrina or the 9/11 or World War II or whatever it is, all of those things are the same thing. And that's one wonderful thing about the book of Revelation is how it helps us to look at these things from different perspectives. To say God's moving his plan forward from Christians' perspective, it's painful, but it's very good. From others' perspective, it's a warning, you need to repent. From others' perspective, it is that final judgment.
Zach, questions?
I don't have a question. That was very simple, but very thorough. And I being a man of a simple mind, I can definitely appreciate that.
Well, good.
But as you can, as I think we all hope, I hope that the pandemic as a result is acting as an accelerant. And for those of us that do have faith in the gospel, I mean, yes, there's some troubled times to come, but ultimately we know that God wins. So we can rest in that.
Yeah, for sure. And one lesson of Revelation, I think my friend Andy Webb, who you may know from Facebook or other ways, said it really well once when somebody was talking about, we Christians, we need to fight, we need to be militant, we need to, get our guns and stuff. And he says, you have to remember, we Christians don't win by killing, we win by dying. And that's something in the first two, the second and third chapter, which are the addresses to the 7 churches. And I think there's a place for civil disobedience and for asserting our rights and all of that, but that's not what actually wins us the battle. In those calls to the churches over and over again, it says, he that overcomes, he that overcomes, he that overcomes. How do you overcome? You overcome by not compromising on your faith and on your gospel until the end, until they get so mad that they kill you. Right? That's how you win. We don't win by going forward and trying. And so when we're facing something really difficult by this, and that's true whether we die by persecution, which most of us won't, but you die by a disease, or you die, but you stay faithful till the end. Through whatever suffering the Lord throws your way, you endure and you trust and you continue on until the end. And then you die and then you win. And that's how we win.
Well, and I think, that's correct, and it goes along with everything we've been saying. It's our civil disobedience isn't going down and protesting at the town square. Right. Not that there's never a place for that. Our protest is getting up on the Lord's Day and going to worship.
Yep, exactly.
And if whatever happens, right. And that's kind of the position that we have taken at our church, is that, again, that's why I go on Sunday.
Yep.
I want to preach
every single Sunday.
Yeah. I want to preach a sermon. I want to worship God, and I can't issue a call to worship faithfully, truthfully, but I can do just about everything except that. Yeah. And then everybody has to kind of make the decision on what they want to do.
Right. But it's an active protest every other Sunday too, not just during this time. Every Sunday, even when it's legal, right. Every Sunday we are issuing our protest against a present evil age. Right. Saying we have other because you could spend your time on Sunday doing something else. You could spend your time on Sunday worshiping the gods of this world, right? Meaning just entertainment or having fun or trying to make money or whatever it is that you might do instead. But instead you go to church, which is to the world an act of foolishness. Doesn't make any sense. So at times like this, perhaps that act of protest is more heightened, but that's what it is every Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to say, I say this to everybody, and I know what you mean, but I don't tell people I go to church on Sunday. I tell them I go to worship. I'm going to worship because
there you go.
Well, it's just because there are people out there that call themselves Christian, right? Nominal Christians, however, and they well, I don't need to go to church. It's like I'm not asking you to go to church. I'm asking you, why aren't you going to worship God?
Right.
You know, that's right. That's what we're assembling to do.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say too, like part of the reason why this is called the Protestant line is because we come from the Protestant line of Christianity, right? The stream. That's kind of what we're emphasizing partially. And even the word in Latin, it's protestatio, I think. It had more of a connotation of witness than it did protest. So our protest is simply a witness. We are witnessing. They were witnessing to the truth of God's word. We're witnessing to the truth of God's word. If you see that as a protest, that's what you see it as. We see it as a witness of following what God has told us to do. So,
that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Zach, more questions. I was expecting some helicopter questions.
No, I'm not gonna buy into that one. No, I just think I have written in my Bible as just something to reflect about from when I've gone through Revelation prior, but it says rest is revelation evokes saints' trust. And I would say that would be accurate. I'd say that that's what we need to be doing. And it's like you explained too, Matt, you know, it's a time of repentance. It's not a time to just be naive to what's going on because you never know.
Right.
We're not supposed to know. But if we're doing what we're supposed to do and repenting and trusting in God, then there's not much else you can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, if there's somebody's out there that's listening, they're a lay person, you know, and they're nervous, right, about what's going on in the world, and I'm gonna pick up the Book of Revelation and see what I'm supposed to know, right? What would you tell them? Where would you tell them to go to get their head straight, to not get turned in the wrong direction? If they, I mean, number one, besides saying, well, just go read something else first. Go read the Gospel of John. Don't read Revelation, right? I mean, if they were determined to read Revelation, do you have any sources of like, go and read this short book besides your own? We'll
my own. But one book I found, really, it's not really it doesn't go through the whole thing. It kind of takes a more outline approach. But
sure.
William Hendrickson's book, More Than Conquerors, I really quite like. That, I think, as far as short works go, I'd say that would be my big recommendation, is More Than Conquerors by William Hendrickson. Other works I can think of that are shorter, for whatever reason, tend to be post-millennial, which is not really a view I agree with. Right. As I was thinking about that, and what Zach was just saying there, verse number 9 of chapter 1, I think is really the theme of the book of Revelation. I think is really what it's all about. He says, I, John, both your brother and companion in the tribulation and kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was on the island that is called Patmos for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ. That idea of tribulation and kingdom and patience, I think, is what Revelation's all about. Presently, we're in tribulation, right? We're suffering. The fact is, and not just reading a book, there's a great book I'm right in the middle of. I'm really enjoying it so far, but it's by Douglas Groothuis, who is a Christian philosopher from Denver Seminary. But it's about the struggle, and it's about suffering. The book is called, Walking Through Twilight. And it's about his wife descending into dementia and just the tremendous hardship and struggle that presented for him. But as I was thinking about this, and my dad passed away a few years ago. And the last year of his life, especially, died of prostate cancer, and it was really difficult, really painful for him, for my mom, for all of us, to watch him. And as I was reading that book, I'm thinking to myself, we're all on the way to the cross, one way or another. If God chooses to take us home in a painless way, in a quick, I step outside and get run over by a bus or something, and off it goes. But otherwise, what I can expect is that one way or another, I'm going to suffer. I'm going to get old, and my body's going to fail, and my mind's going to fail, and I'm going to go into a long, painful struggle and eventually die. Some people get lucky and have massive heart attacks when they turn 70 or 80 or something and don't suffer like that. But I have no reason to expect that's the case, right? We're all on our way to the cross. And so, and the world's against us, we're viewed as fools and idiots. We're pilgrims and strangers. We don't belong here. Think of, most of the Christians in the world. I mean, we Christians in America, man, we have it extraordinarily lucky because most Christians in the world right now live in places like China or India or Nigeria or other Pakistan, places where they're suffering tremendously. Tribulation. However, we know the gospel of the kingdom, the good news, the kingdom is ours, right? As Zach said earlier, we've already won. We know that, right? But we're not experiencing all the joy of that right now. And so we need patience. Kingdom, tribulation, patience. And that's what I think the book of Revelation is all about. So I think if you have a little bit of a guidepost to say this is what the book is talking about, the book of Revelation is actually not hard. It's not difficult. I think it's all pretty clear. Once you kind of shift your way of thinking about it, you stop looking at it as this sort of chronological series of events that's going to happen at some point, and you look at it as a big picture spiritual oversight into the real nature of what's going on right now. And then it's a tremendously hopeful book. Because it's acknowledging, the world's scary, the world's tough, but actually the world's a paper tiger. The world can't really hurt us. All the world can do is fool us into thinking it can hurt us. And once we realize the battle's already won and we just need to wait it out. We just need to overcome until we die and then we win, and then I find it a tremendously encouraging and hopeful book. Because where does it all end? I mean, we see the defeat that comes at the end, just the word comes out of the mouth of the rider on the white horse and all of the enemy is just destroyed just like that,
Yeah, no, I don't remember who the first person was that said it to me years ago, but, someone said exactly what Zach said. The point of Revelation is that God wins.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you know that that's the point to start, then some of the scary stuff isn't quite so scary.
Right.
Especially when you are living under the paradigm that God is truly sovereign from beginning to end. It's when you're trying to work your way through some of this stuff and seeking your own salvation and sanctification. Then it can definitely be scary.
Right.
Then am I doing good enough?
Right.
And
so
people are leading you astray to read the book incorrectly.
Yeah, exactly. And seeing it all, and as again, reading it in a modern lens and making it, I think it's sad that dispensationalism has in a lot of ways robbed the book of Revelation from the church. It's stolen the book from us so that people either believe these wacky things about the rapture and all that stuff, and all their crazy charts and everything, or on the other hand, and this I find to be even more so the case today, is they just throw their hands up and say, I don't understand all that stuff. I don't read the book of Revelation. It's just weird. And so I just don't bother with it, which I think is really sad because I think there is no other book of the New Testament that helps us understand the modern age, the present age more than the book of Revelation on a big picture historical level. I think it's the book of Revelation in the New Testament that really shows us what's going on.
I think you're 100% correct again. And I think that the modern church is robbed of the big picture.
Yeah.
Because the modern visible church, right, evangelical church,
right,
is robbed because the big picture it has turned into this scary, futuristic,
Yeah.
destructive thing that's going to happen. And are we going to get taken out before or after the tribulation?
My wife,
that's not the
who
point.
grew up in dispensational circles says that the way the book of Revelation was mostly used for her was to scare her into being a Christian, because if she was a Christian, then she'd be raptured away and she wouldn't have to experience any of these things. Yeah. And that was basically how it was used.
How old are you, Matt?
I'm 46.
Okay, I'm 50. And you would have been around. And I grew up in the South, but I remember it was Friday nights, the Methodist Church downtown in Franklin, Kentucky, would show those movies from the 70s. I can't think of what's that?
The Hal Lindsey?
Well, no, they were like movies. They were the actual. They played "I Wish We'd All Been Ready" in the middle of the movie by Norm, whatever. I can't think of his name, but they were movies about what would happen, after the rapture and the people that were left behind. I can't remember the name of those, but they were meant to scare people into going, and they were all based upon this poor dispensational, interpretation of Revelation.
Having grown up in Reformed circles, I sometimes feel like a bit of a stranger to modern evangelical culture. I just some of these things like, I don't know.
If I had thought about it, I would have looked it up, because I think you can find bits and pieces on YouTube.
Probably.
And I mean, it's really bad. They're bad. They're like bad B movies. Yeah. But thinking about a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old watching these things, they're horrifying. They're really horrifying.
I actually remember when I was about 8 or 9 or so. And so let's see, I was born in 74. And so this would have been in the early 80s. I came across a tract that my dad had from somewhere. It was like a Jack Chick thing, the cartoon, the little comics, but they're all these luridly drawn. He just had a lot of special extra attention for the Whore of Babylon for whatever reason. He just really drew that one especially well. But one of these really scary tracts about all these things that were going to happen. And there was a little footnote at one point. It says all these things are going to happen within one generation of the budding of the fig tree. And there was a little footnote down there that said, budding of the fig tree is Israel becomes a nation, which happened in 1948. So this is going to happen in 1978, 30 years, one generation. And this was like 82, right? And so I was terrified. And I went to Dad and I said, Dad, the rapture happened. And we're in the tribulation. And he just says, don't pay any attention to that. It's like, oh, okay.
Well, so Scott Netto just piped in. It was A Thief in the Night was the name of one of the movies. There was like a series. There was a series of them. And then Larry Norman. I was Norm something I knew. But yeah, Larry Norman, famous Christian singer out of the 70s.
I know.
Yeah. But yeah, they played his song as one of the theme songs or something in the movie. But yeah, they're pretty bad. They're pretty bad B movies.
It's a sad thing to me that it makes the book basically irrelevant. Either a preterist or a dispensationalist reading makes the book basically irrelevant to most of the Christians who would ever read it.
Yeah. What if you're a partial preterist idealist? How does that make it irrelevant?
I not necessarily. I think we need to understand the book of Revelation, and I think especially verse number 3 of chapter 1 says, "Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of this prophecy and keep those things which are written in it, for the time is near." I think what that assumes is that this book is going to be relevant. This book is going to impact the way that Christians think about their lives, right?
True.
And so, I think room for, disagreement, obviously, about what, some of this might be referring to the early church and the fall of Jerusalem and some of those things. I don't really think any of it is. I think it was written after the fall of Jerusalem. But nonetheless, wherever you fall out exactly on that question, I think the straightforward way to read this is that this is telling us things that are important for every Christian to know up until the point when Christ comes again. And and any reading, any understanding of the book that makes it all about 70 AD or all about things that are going to happen after the rapture, I think fail that test.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But that's where I fall. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah,
because I take a partial preterist slash idealist view. So, I mean, I believe it pertains to what happened then, but also throughout history. So
Yeah.
it's very particular for me,
Yeah.
for 70 AD, but then cycles through. There's nothing new under the sun. This is going to happen.
I think the book at least picks up a lot of themes from the fall of Jerusalem and uses them to make its point. I don't think it has nothing to do with 70 AD.
Right.
I don't think it's predicting 70 AD. I think it uses the themes of 70 AD to talk about what it wants to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. And then this is where, I'll say good men, although none of us are good, can have difference of opinion, and that's okay.
Absolutely.
And that's I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
The question I had, so you mentioned Hendrickson.
Yeah.
And I haven't read your book. Do either of you all go into just any kind of discussion whatsoever about like where you would need to read in the Old Testament? Because again, I think that's what's lacking as well. To tell people, hey, this is the imagery that you need from the Old Testament to understand Revelation that you kind of don't have.
I try to spend a lot of time talking about that.
Okay.
As I go through the book, and Hendrickson does too, as I go through the book, what I do is I say, this is a reference to this prophecy, this passage, this Old Testament. It's picking up themes from, the 10 plagues in Egypt, the Exodus. And I think actually of all the Old Testament books, I think actually Ezekiel is more quoted, is more referred to than any other book of the Old Testament. And I draw a lot of that out. And it's one reason actually my two books go together pretty well, because Revelation in a lot of ways, Daniel is a close second, but Ezekiel is heavily referred to. And see, the thing John does is he kind of assumes the knowledge, and so he doesn't broadcast it. He just kind of makes references. He just kind of pings it, so that he just makes a quick reference so that you'll import all of this whole imagery into the way that you think about this. He's assuming you understand those books, so that reading Revelation without a pretty thorough knowledge of the Old Testament, or at least someone to guide you along the way, is going to lead you astray. And so that's what I try to do. I try to, it's hard to say just read this or read that. It's the whole Old Testament. It refers to almost every book in the Old Testament. In one way or another, the sacrificial system, the temple, the creation, the Exodus is a big thing in for the plagues and different things like that. A lot of the prophecies, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Daniel, but Jeremiah and Isaiah too, the Psalms. There's just a ton of references, and a lot of them are quick. They're not drawn out. They're just, he'll make a reference, but you've got to know the Old Testament context to know how that plays into the overall point that John is making. So from that perspective, John is a dense and tough book, because of itself, it's not that long. But when you realize that it's sort of got the whole, and a lot of the New Testament, but the whole Old Testament kind of lying behind it, then it's, just a couple of verses can pack a whole ton of meaning into them when you see the whole Old Testament background that's behind that. So I think that's why you really need that background.
Yeah, and we're Protestant, sola Christians.
Yeah.
And it's like, I always think, especially coming through this resurrection season, just that road to Emmaus where it's like, do you guys not know?
Yeah.
It opens up the whole Old Testament to them.
Yeah.
It's all there. You're not seeing it.
And that's why I see that the problem with dispensationalism is not really their eschatology. Their eschatology is a symptom of the core problem. And the core problem is the separation of Israel and the church. Yeah. Because once you do that, once you break, Israel and the church are different things. They're always different things. They're, rather than seeing them as a progressive thing, Israel and the church are relate to each other as the child and the man. There's unity there, continuity. If you don't see that, then the wacky eschatology and interpretation of Revelation and other prophecies flows out of that fundamental problem. And a failure to see the unity of the Old and New Testaments is the major difficulty there. And that's so as you said, we're Protestants. We see the unity of God's revelation. And you mentioned earlier, Zach, the covenants, and that's all just vital.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, I have a huge amount of respect for you because it takes a whole lot of biblical knowledge to tackle that book with competence. And also, I just wanted to revert back to you talking about, there will be suffering, because I think that's something else that gets lost. And I don't mean to go off on a complete bird walk, but I think a lot of people still in the modern evangelical circle, they believe, when you become a Christian, you shouldn't have to suffer. And I think that is wildly wrong.
It's terrible. I hear people say, Jesus suffered, so we don't have to. No, Paul says if we suffer with him, we shall be glorified with him. A theology of suffering. And that's a big part of what my book tries to do. Because I think Revelation is wonderful for showing us the real purpose of one aspect of the real purpose of suffering is to testify the sufferings of Christ. And that's why I say it's important to recognize we're all on the way to the cross, one way or another. That's why I think when the book of Revelation talks about martyrs, those who have been slain, Revelation is talking about every Christian there. We all die to the world. We're all on our way to the cross. We all have to be willing to take up our cross and follow him. Because yes, absolutely, theology, it's not a rabbit trail at all. It's vital. And I think it's vital for people to understand in this time. People are so desperate to avoid suffering, they're willing to virtually deny the gospel, at least in practice. But the scriptures are clear. Again, if we suffer with him, we shall be glorified with him.
Zach, you could have thrown me a bone there. I did preach a sermon about suffering
Great job,
yesterday.
Well, it's not all about you, Todd.
Well, I'm just wondering, were you paying attention yesterday? Were you? I'm going to have to check with your wife to see if you were watching the service yesterday.
Uh-oh.
I was. Ask the Lopez's.
You had a follow-up, Zach.
No, I think it's just, if you, aside from Todd's sermon, which I will allow him to speak about if he likes, but if you pay attention to the experience or deaths of the apostles, you would understand that they were not exempt from any sort of suffering, so why would we be?
Yeah. But even going beyond like actual persecution, which I think to some degree is, it's kind of a different subject, but it's not. It's a very related subject, obviously. But even the way we as Christians approach things like disease or poverty or war, the sufferings that are not aimed at Christians, but they're just aspects of living in this present cursed world, right? That's an aspect of taking up your cross too, because how do you approach those things? Do you approach those things as things to be avoided at all costs? Or do you accept those things as part of God's will for us? And I take Advil when I have a headache, don't get me wrong, but some things can't be avoided, right? Some pain can't be, I thank God for medicine, but it still is really limited in what it at best can put off death for a little while, right? So how do we approach those things? Because that's an aspect of suffering for Christ as well. When I say I'm going to accept that I lived in a cursed and fallen world and I'm going to suffer therefore, and that's not the most terrifying thing. And instead of approaching suffering as something that I will avoid at any costs, instead of approaching it as God's will for me, that he's going to do good for me through. That I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to grow. I'm going to learn to trust God better. I'm going to learn to hold this life lightly. and all those kinds of things. And I'm going to learn to die well. You know, the old Puritans talked about the virtue of learning to die well, you know, and that's, we don't talk about, we just try to avoid it at any costs now, you know. And I think this whole pandemic is a wonderful, you know, there are worse things than dying. And so yeah, a theology of suffering, absolutely, and recognizing that death is going to come for all of us, and there's going to be plenty of suffering along the way, but that's not the worst thing in the world. That's not a terrifying, it shouldn't be terrifying to us. We should view it as God's will and face it with you know, trust and confidence. That's going to change the way you face everything, including the hostility of the world, but also just the regular, you know, you're going to run to the bottle. You're going to spend all your money to try and solve any problem you can. You're going to, you know, react with rage or despair or whatever, or you're going to face it and you're going to say, I'm going to trust God. And I'm going to walk through this.
Those doctors that I mentioned earlier out of California, that they made a comment or two that I think probably should scare us, in the sense of thinking about what the world might attempt to do now.
Yeah.
And that is, and they were against this, but they were saying, you know, according to the raw data, you know, again, when we started, this was new, but now we've got 2 months of data. The flu kills a little bit more than 1% of the people that catch it. The COVID-19 is killing a little bit under 1%, right? So it's statistically, it's not as deadly. He said, but what the government is trying to do right now is they're trying to act like we can't go back to business until we can capture every single case. Like nobody can die from COVID-19 before we can go back to normal.
Right.
And that's just not reality.
Right.
And that is way too much. Again, it's like they're trying to build a utopia on earth now without God, you know, trying to get it to where we can live forever and never have disease. And it's like, it's just an unrealistic thing, especially when, again, like just what you laid out from Revelation, and just having a theology of suffering. Again, as I tried to say in a sermon that Zach didn't pay attention to, suffering is part of what brings about our sanctification.
Absolutely.
You know, it does reveal to us our sin, our pride, where our faith and hope and trust is. And so it's all part of that process.
Yep.
And so what's scary is this is just the first shot across the bow from the world to see what they can kind of push on people. And then the next time, you know, this isn't a bad disease is what we're finding out.
Yeah.
So what happens when we do have a bad disease that comes through?
Well, or are they just going to use this for the seasonal flu every year? I mean, you know, tyrants have used fear to control people forever, you know, and I wouldn't be so willing to believe the worst about the way the government is handling this if they hadn't lied to us so many times already, you know? But again, you know, what's Revelation teaching us? They may think they're doing one thing, but God's doing something very different. And they don't, you know, he who sits in the heavens shall laugh at their schemes. You know, you remember Psalm 2. So I agree with you, but the disagreement I would say would be, this is what should scare us. We should be alert to it and ready for it, but it shouldn't scare us. Yeah. You know, I'm nitpicking there. I know what you were saying, and I agree. But you get the point I make. God, they may be doing one thing. That doesn't mean that's what God's doing, right? Correct. Yeah. So they have their schemes, but they don't control near as much as they think they do.
And it's why I'm glad God brought me out to Western Nebraska, a place I would have never come to on my own.
Yeah.
Because I think we're a little bit more prepared to
live
in the world.
Wyoming's a lot like Western Nebraska. And as far as places to be, if something like that really does happen, well, I'd rather be here than a whole lot of places.
Yeah, for sure. Zach?
I'm just happy to not be in Colorado.
It's true.
That's the best I can say.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to tie you up any longer, Matt. We do appreciate you joining us this evening. I do want to direct folks as we're closing up here to where they can find out more about you, if I can pull this up fast enough. So we've got the church's webpage.
Yeah.
It's ChristReformedRCUS.org.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a
church here in Casper, and that's got links to my rather outdated blog and other stuff too. So, and all my sermons and everything are on there. Yeah.
And does it have? I'm looking real quick here. Does it have like email somewhere?
Yeah. My email address is on there down somewhere. I'm sure. Contact us or something like that.
Yeah.
If you scroll down on the side over there, it should have a way of contacting me. Or I got a phone number right there too.
Okay. I can't see everything, but because of the way this is set up. So
okay, let me pop over the site there. And yeah, on the sidebar under Christ Reformed Church of Casper, there's contact us, and that's got a form you can fill out that'll get right to me. Or I'm on Facebook and all that stuff. So
sure, yeah, you guys have a Facebook page as well.
Yeah,
right,
yeah. The church does, I personally do. Yeah.
Any last thoughts you have for us, or?
It's just been fun, and thanks so much for having me on. And I'm really excited about what you guys are doing here, and looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, appreciate it. Mondays, 6 o'clock.
All right.
And
I'll make a note.
Matt, thank you, and have a great evening. God bless.
Thanks. You too.
All right. And I think we're done. We're going to end the broadcast. I think Matt's still hanging around. If you hang around, Matt, we'll still talk to you a little bit more. But thanks again, everybody. And we will see you next week. You know how to contact us if you need to. Take care.